And now, suspense.
When people ask me what my favorite movies are, I always say, okay, the Lord of the Rings trilogy is so far up here that if I have another list, next favorite is going to be so far below that it may not even be worth discussing. I remember the first time I saw all three of those movies, and I was in awe of just every element. You know, visually they're beautiful, the story is beautiful, the acting is just on point across the board. So anything, I compare everything against those three movies, and I can't watch them very often just because of time, obviously, and it's a lot of work to watch those movies. So what if you have to give me one all-time favorite movie, what is it?
Oh, this one's easy because it's never changed, and I'm sure people who have watched my show here are probably tired of me talking about it, but my favorite movie of all time is The Godfather. I think it's the greatest film ever made. Like, you know, when you stack any other movie against Lord of the Rings trilogy, I do the same thing with The Godfather. I'm like, do I love it as much as The Godfather? Can I sit through 3 hours? Like that's one of those movies a lot of people have issues with sitting down for a couple of hours. I can watch The Godfather, which is like 3 hours long, and it doesn't even feel like 3 hours long.
No problem.
I can sit through every single second and love it. I love the cinematography of it. I love the music. The acting is great. Like it's one of those movies where to me it's like my favorite because I have no issue with nitpicking or just saying what I don't like about a movie. And it's never out of disrespect. It's more like I just don't really care for this or this. But with The Godfather, I can't pick a single thing that I don't like about it. Like to me, it's just perfection. Like you can name any movie and I can name something that I don't care for. Like, you know, with The Lord of the Rings, there are things about it where I'm just like, I love them. But there are like one or two things where I'm like, I could do without that, or I could do without that. But like, you know, with The Godfather, there's everything about it I just love.
I think that I have another singular movie out below, you know, down from the Lord of the Rings mountain from me. I think every generation goes through the Scarface moment, and obviously Scarface has crossed over with hip hop culture and like fashion and all sorts of stuff. But I think Carlito's Way is so much better as a film than Scarface, and not a lot of people will agree with me. And when I moved to Los Angeles, I lived in Los Angeles for a little while, like 6 months. And when I first got there, my life was kind of, we moved there, me and my best friend moved there from Northern California down to LA, expecting to have a place to live. Well, we got there and it was a house that was still being built, like no carpet, no paint, just basically the walls and the structure. And we were like, well, we moved here to move in here. So we just lived there. So I had a futon and a VCR and a tiny TV. And I think the only tape I had was Carlito's Way. So I watched it every day for quite a while. So I really dug into it and I really watched the nuances and the performances and the story. So Carlito's Way might be that one for me where it's just like, damn, I can't figure out, you know, I can't find things that I don't like about this movie. Maybe it's tied in with whatever situation I was in too, but Mystic River is like that. I think Mystic River has some of the best Sean Penn's scene on the porch when he's talking to Tim Robbins about his daughter's death. I don't know. I show my acting students that scene. I'm like, if you really want to get down and dirty in this business, you got to be able to do that. And they walk like, how do you do that? And I'm like, well, it's a combination of natural talent and craft and commitment. And, you know, standard. That's the standard, I think, for me. I used to love As Good as It Gets. That Jack Nicholson and Greg Kinnear and Cuba Gooding Jr. and Helen Hunt, I think. That's another great one.
With the release of like, you know, 4K and stuff of different older movies and getting like restored and all that stuff, that also kind of what I love about that so much is that it allows me to revisit these older movies that I forgot how great they were and I forgot how much I love them. Like I recently watched The Green Mile and I'm sitting there thinking like, this is like probably one of the greatest films ever made. Like everything about it is just so good.
Right.
And it just looks great. The sound's great. Like everything. It's like I think that's what I love so much about like film is that you can watch something and just be in awe of what you're seeing and just being like, this was actually made. Everything about it that went into making this movie was just like done so well that anything less is just kind of like a disservice to this story.
In Army of the Dead, when we filmed the scene, when we were all coming down the hill, picking off zombies, headed into Vegas after it had already been destroyed, the transportation van drove us out to the back lot of Albuquerque Studios where we were filming, where they had everything set up. They, the overturned buildings and buses and crashed airplanes and all that stuff. The size and scope of the green screens that they had up on cranes blew my mind. You said this was actually made. That moment for me of knowing when I saw the movie and then remembered back to filming that scene and knowing that these green screens were probably 30 feet by 60 feet. And there was like 8 of them up on cranes in the background. And I was like, oh, wow. And then they're going to go back and CGI whatever's going on in, behind us onto those screens. And that movie was a lesson for me in understanding the use of technology. Obviously that fact that Chris D'Elia was edited out of the movie and then they put Tig Notaro in and she did everything with just one other actor reading lines against a green screen. And I was like, oh my gosh, like that was that was kind of a shocking moment when I found out all that was going to happen, just because I was around, I was around for all of this shooting of all the scenes that she replaced him in. So that was a weird moment, but I think it worked. I could tell, but it worked.
Yeah. To someone who, someone like me who didn't work on the project or wasn't there, I did not notice until someone told me afterwards. I had watched the movie and I was like, oh, okay, yeah, like she was probably like one of my favorite characters. It was great. And it wasn't until like, afterwards, because sometimes I don't keep up with like news around film because I feel like sometimes that kind of like messes with my movie watching experience.
Right.
So, when I heard about it afterwards, I was like, that's interesting. And so I rewatched it and I was like, oh, okay, I can tell. But when I first, my first go around, I could not tell. I had no idea. So then I started thinking like, wow, like that is some really, really great work. So much work had to go into that with having to put all of, the movements and everything perfectly to actually be put into those scenes.
Yeah. It was really crazy. And I think if anybody's going to pull that off, it's Zach, because I don't know how much of the behind the scenes interviews you watched with him, but he agonizes over the smallest visual details in every frame. Like when the helicopter's leaving, he said, I sat there for 2 hours fixing the heat signature coming off the helicopter to where I got it, where I thought it was perfect. And I'm like, wow, dude, like, I mean, it takes a certain kind of person to make movies on that scale anyway. But just knowing how much detail he and the editor put into the final project or the final product was pretty mind boggling. And he's a magical person. I'll tell you my audition story is kind of funny. It's back when we were at least going in person for the callbacks. Now everything's they book us from tape only. But even when we were going to the casting directors, we would go to the casting director's office, shoot the tape, and then we either got called back to an in-person or we didn't. So I did my tape. A couple days later, I got the call back. It said, go to Albuquerque Studios at this time, blah, blah, blah. So I get in the car, I drive out to Albuquerque Studios, and I have a ritual before any audition. I go in the bathroom and I make sure like I don't have a booger. I make sure that there's not like buzz in my hair or something, my shirt collar's not sticking up or whatever. And I was in the bathroom at Albuquerque Studios in the lobby, and this dude walks in the bathroom and he was like, God, dude, it's so hot. And I said, yeah, man, my friend is working on set in Burbank and she said it's like 100 degrees on set. And he goes, dang, I hope my house doesn't burn down. And we kind of like shared and I was like, wow, there's wildfires in California right now on top of being hot. And I was like, are you sure is it too soon for that joke or whatever? And we just had this little laugh and no idea who it was. And then I get called in for my callback appointment. And the dude I had been joking around with in the bathroom was ZACK SNYDER. And he was like, what's up, dude? And I was like, hey, what's up, guy from the bathroom that's actually ZACK SNYDER. And I think it took a lot of the pressure off of the moment because like Zach was there. and his wife, who was the other executive producer, was in the back, and then a couple other people. And I did my audition. He gave me a couple little directions. I did it again. And then he just turned around to Deborah and gave a thumbs up and then said, "Good job, dude." And I left. And then the next day I got the email that I had been booked. And so it was just funny because I know that there are so many Zack Snyder fans out there that know way more about him than I do, that would have known that was Zack Snyder in the bathroom. I had no idea. That funny pre-audition moment, and then it ends up being the dude who is like half of the world's hero as a filmmaker. So
yeah, you're actually speaking to one of them. I'm like a huge like Zack Snyder fan.
Right. I think that's how we initially kind of connected, was because of the Army of the Dead crossover stuff. We've connected on 100 other things more important as far as I'm concerned.